In the vast spiraling arms of the Praxis Nebula, where cosmic dust painted the void in hues of emerald and violet, sat the diplomatic vessel known as the Eternal Accord. Despite its grand title, the ship resembled nothing so much as an enormous metal pincushion, with various antennae, sensors, and cultural appendages jutting out at all angles to accommodate the 13 different species that comprise the Galactic Cooperative. Lieutenant Commander Thomas Cooper stared out of the viewport, absently tapping a worn paperback against his thigh. At 42, Cooper was neither the youngest nor the most qualified human representative Earth could have sent. But he had one distinct advantage over his more decorated colleagues. He simply didn't care enough to be nervous around aliens. Human Cooper, your presence is required in Chamber 7 Delta for the cultural exchange procedure, announced the ship's AI in the flat, measured tones that all AIs seem to adopt when addressing humans. The Voldaxian delegation expresses temporal concern. Cooper sighed. Tell them I'm on my way and that humans consider it polite to wait at least 5 minutes before getting their tentacles in a twist. The AI paused, its processes almost audibly whirring. I have transmitted a modified version of your message. Thought you might, Cooper muttered, tucking the paperback into his uniform pocket. Chamber 7 Delta had been designed to accommodate multiple species simultaneously, which meant it satisfied no one. The gravity was set to a compromise that left the high-density species floating uncomfortably and the low-gravity ones clinging to stabilizing harnesses. The temperature cycled, between too warm and too cold every 17 minutes. The lighting alternated between spectrums, occasionally dipping into ultraviolet ranges that made Cooper's teeth itch. The Voldaxian ambassador, Zentrock, hovered near the central table. Like all Voldaxians, Zentrock resembled a collection of semi-transparent blue cylinders arranged in a roughly pyramidal structure, with sensory filaments drifting from the top segment like ghostly hair. The being's voice translator glowed as Cooper entered. Human Cooper, we have been awaiting your arrival for 7.2 metric minutes, Zentrock announced. The cultural exchange schedule has been compromised. Sorry about that, Cooper said, not sounding remotely sorry. I was finishing up my contribution. He patted the book in his pocket. Around the chamber, representatives from various species shifted with either interest or impatience. It was often difficult to tell which. The insectoid Crith delegates clicked their mandibles rapidly, which Cooper had learned indicated either excitement or murderous intent. The amorphous Gelans in their containment suits burbled quietly. A lone Mechanian, more machine now than whatever they had once been, simply recorded everything with unblinking optical sensors. As you are aware, Zentrock continued, filaments, waving in what Cooper recognized as agitation. This cultural exchange is a prerequisite to Earth's provisional membership in the Galactic Cooperative. All species must contribute a data cache of cultural significance that illuminates their societal development. I'm familiar with the protocol, Cooper said, sliding into his designated seat. All 13 founding species share their myths and legends, their collected wisdom, their cultural touchstones, and we newcomers do the same. A galactic book club, if you will. The Crith ambassador's translator sparked to life. We do not will a book club, Human Cooper. This exchange traces back 17,000 cycles to the founding accords that prevented the extinction of multiple sentient species during the proximal wars. Just an expression, Cooper said, waving away the correction. So, who's up first? I'd love to hear more about the Gelans' ancestral puddles or the Mechanian creation schemas. A disapproving silence fell across the chamber. Cooper had long suspected that disapproval was the one truly universal constant in the universe. Zentrock's filaments stiffened. As the applicant species, the protocol clearly states that humans provide their cultural artifact first. This allows established members to evaluate compatibility. Right. Cooper nodded, extracting the worn paperback from his pocket. Well, I've brought something special. While my colleagues back on Earth were compiling massive databases of human literature and art spanning millennia, I thought, why not give you something more accessible? Something that really captures the human imagination. He placed the book on the scanning plate in the center of the table. The title, slightly faded but still legible, read, World Mythology, an anthology of the great myths and epics, The scanning beam swept over the book, digitizing each page and automatically translating the contents into the 13 standard languages of the cooperative. The projection above the table showed the data transfer in progress. This is a compilation of stories humans have told each other for thousands of years, Cooper explained. Gods and monsters, heroes and villains, creation and destruction. The stuff that shaped how we see ourselves and our place in the universe. The Mechanian representative's optical sensors whirred as they adjusted focus. Clarification requested. These are your species' historical records? Cooper chuckled. No, these are myth, stories, fiction. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees, and it wasn't part of the environmental cycle. Fiction, repeated Zentrock, the translator somehow managing to infuse the word with disdain. You have brought fabrications to a solemn cultural exchange? Cooper frowned. Well, yes. Myths are important cultural touchstones. They reveal how humans process the unknown, how we deal with fear, how we aspire to. You misunderstand the purpose of this exchange, interrupted the Krith ambassador, mandibles now definitely clicking in what Cooper recognized as agitation. We share factual accounts of our developmental histories to assess compatibility and prevent cultural catastrophes. Wait, Cooper said, raising a hand. Are you telling me that everything you've shared with us so far, all those incredible tales about your species, those were all literally true? The delegates exchanged what could only be described as uncomfortable glances, despite most lacking conventional eyes. Of course, Zentrock replied. Why would we transmit falsehoods as representative cultural artifacts? Cooper leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. Oh, this is interesting. So when the Krith delegation shared the saga of the Hive Ascension, with those massive warrior queens who could split moons with their mandibles, that actually happened? The Krith representatives chittered in what might have been embarrassment. The accounts may contain minor measurement exaggerations due to pre-scientific observation limitations, admitted their ambassador. But the events occurred as described. And the Mechanian origin protocols? Cooper pressed. The part where your creator intelligence sacrificed its core programming to give your species free will. A documented historical event, the Mechanian confirmed. We commemorate the exact timestamp annually. Cooper turned to the gelatinous forms of the Gellan delegation. What about your sundering of the primal puddle, the great division that created the 7 thought strains of your species? Why would we fabricate our biological differentiation? Burbled the Gellan translator. It would be like denying your own cellular structure. Cooper couldn't help himself. He laughed. Not a polite diplomatic chuckle, but a full-throated laugh that echoed off the chamber walls. The delegates stiffened, floated, or otherwise displayed their respective versions of alarm. I apologize, Cooper said, wiping his eyes. It's just, humans are probably the only species here who would consider it completely normal to define ourselves through elaborate falsehoods. Zentrock's filaments had drawn in close to their central mass, a sign of deep concern. The scanning process is complete. The contents of your artifact have been distributed to all delegates for review. Excellent, Cooper said. You're in for a treat. We've got Zeus throwing lightning bolts, Loki shape-shifting into animals, ancient Egyptian gods with animal heads, Norse frost giants, Chinese dragons that control the weather, people turning into constellations. The whole works. A strange sound filled the chamber, a rapid, high-pitched beeping from multiple translator devices simultaneously. Cooper recognized it as the universal alert for procedural confusion. Human Cooper, Zentrock said carefully, you seem to be describing environmental manipulation capabilities, matter-energy conversion technologies, genetic hybridization, atmospheric control mechanisms, and cosmological engineering. These are all Class 1 restricted technologies under the Proximal Accords. Cooper blinked. No, these are just stories, myths, things ancient humans made up to explain natural phenomena they didn't understand. Made up, repeated the Mechanian, the translator struggling to convey the concept. You created false accounts of possessing the most dangerous technologies in known space for entertainment? Well, when you put it that way, it sounds weird. Cooper admitted. But yes, essentially. Every human culture created myths to explain the world around them. Gods to explain natural forces, monsters to explain dangers, heroes to embody virtues. It's how we processed reality before we had science. The Krith representatives were now chittering so rapidly that their translators couldn't keep up. The Gellans had changed color from their normal translucent blue to an alarmed orange. The Mechanians' optical sensors had powered down and restarted twice in quick succession. I believe, Zentrock said slowly, that we must call an immediate recess to consult with our respective authorities. This is unprecedented. Cooper frowned. I'm not following. What's the problem? The problem, human Cooper, said Zentrock, filaments now rigid with what could only be described as bureaucratic terror, is that you have just provided evidence that humans routinely conceptualize wielding powers that have destroyed civilizations. You imagine controlling weather, transforming matter, manipulating genetic structures, and restructuring cosmological bodies for amusement. It's not evidence of anything except an active imagination, Cooper protested. These stories come from times when humans couldn't even harness electricity, let alone restructure the cosmos. That is precisely what concerns us, the Mechanian stated flatly. Your species contemplated these powers before you had achieved even basic energy manipulation. You dreamed of them. You assigned them to higher beings you invented, beings you simultaneously worshipped and resented. The Gellan delegate bubbled what the translator rendered as, the cooperative has encountered 17 species that achieved matter-energy conversion technology. 15 of them destroyed themselves within one standard cycle of development. The 2 survivors only managed because they had strict cultural taboos against even conceptualizing certain applications. And your species, Zentrock added, created entertainment about such applications before you could even leave your own planet. Cooper looked around the chamber, suddenly aware that every alien present was regarding him with some variation of horror. Come on, they're just stories. Fiction, fantasy, every intelligent species must have them. The silence that greeted this statement was profound. You mean, Cooper said slowly, realization dawning, none of you have fiction? No made-up stories at all? Why would we fabricate events that did not occur? Asked the Krith ambassador, mandibles twitching in confusion. What purpose would such deception serve? Cooper ran a hand through his hair, mind racing. It's not deception, it's imagination, creativity. We explore possibilities through storytelling. We process fears, hopes, dreams. It's how we make sense of the world and ourselves. By pretending to wield civilization-ending powers, Zentrock's translator managed to convey deep skepticism. Sometimes, yes, Cooper admitted, but also by imagining what it would be like to fly, or to talk to animals, or to live forever, or to meet beings from other worlds. It helps us process our limitations and aspirations. The Mechanian's optical sensors focused intently on Cooper. Query: do humans also create fiction about encountering other intelligent species? Cooper laughed nervously. Oh, we've been imagining meeting aliens for centuries. We've got thousands of stories about it, some peaceful, some less so. This prompted another round of alarm beeps from multiple translators. You have been conceptualizing interspecies contact scenarios without actual data? The Gellan delegate had now turned a disturbing shade of red. Including conflict scenarios? Well, yes, Cooper said. We call it science fiction. It's how we prepare ourselves mentally for possibilities we haven't experienced yet. Zentrock's filaments were now twitching spasmodically. The human species has been mentally rehearsing potential first contact scenarios, including hostile ones, for generations before actually encountering other intelligent life. This is deeply concerning. Cooper felt the conversation slipping away from him. Look, I think you're all misunderstanding. Fiction isn't preparation for action, it's exploration of possibility. It's how we exercise our minds, how we build empathy by imagining other perspectives. Human Cooper, the Mechanian stated,
Our preliminary analysis of your cultural artifact reveals that humans have imagined destroying their own world 152
different ways, creating life 94 different ways, and transforming into other species 219 different ways. These are all concepts that most species only consider once they have the technological capability to attempt them, if ever. And in many cases, added Zentrock, such conceptualizations directly preceded catastrophic technological misapplication. That is why the cooperative monitors cultural patterns so carefully. Cooper stared at the book, now seeing it through alien eyes. What had seemed like a perfect representation of human creativity now looked like a catalog of existential threats that humans casually entertained. I think, he said carefully, that we're experiencing a profound cultural difference here. For humans, imagination isn't a precursor to action. It's often a substitute for it. We tell stories about wielding godlike powers precisely because we know we can't actually do those things. Yet, added the Krith ambassador ominously, you cannot do those things yet. And when you can, said Zentrock, your species will already have thoroughly explored the ramifications through these myths and fictions. Cooper nodded slowly. Yes, exactly. That's the benefit. We work through the ethical and practical consequences in our imagination first. Like your Prometheus myth, the Mechanian noted, clearly having already analyzed the book's contents. A being punished eternally for giving forbidden technology to your species. Yet the narrative portrays this as a tragic injustice, suggesting humans believe they have a right to all knowledge, regardless of consequences. Cooper winced. That's one interpretation, but... Or your Tower of Babel account, interrupted Zentrock. Beings punished for attempting to reach the heavens, yet again portrayed as an unjust limitation rather than a prudent restriction. Myths reflect cultural tensions and questions, Cooper protested. They don't represent consensus views. The Gellan delegate bubbled agitately. Our analysis suggests 78.3% of these myths involve beings suffering consequences for pursuing forbidden knowledge or power. Yet the narratives consistently evoke sympathy for the transgressors. Cooper sighed. Look, I clearly made a mistake. In my selection, I thought I was sharing something that showcased human creativity and cultural development. If this is causing diplomatic concerns, we can substitute something else from Earth's databanks. That will not be necessary, Zentrock said, filaments now eerily still. This artifact has been most illuminating. The way the alien said illuminating sent a chill down Cooper's spine. The delegates must now confer privately, announced the Krith ambassador. Human Cooper will be escorted to the waiting chamber. Hold on, Cooper said, rising from his seat. If there are concerns about Earth's admission to the cooperative, based on our mythology, I should be allowed to address them. This is not a rejection proceeding, Zentrock assured him, though something in the alien's tone was far from reassuring. Merely a risk assessment recalibration. 2 security drones detached from the chamber ceiling and hovered on either side of Cooper, clearly waiting to escort him out. Fine, he said, grabbing his book from the scanning plate. But for the record, just because humans imagine something doesn't mean we intend to do it. Sometimes a story is just a story. As the security drones guided him from the chamber, Cooper heard the Mechanian say to the others, "That statement directly contradicts known historical patterns. In 94.3% of documented cases, what sentient species imagine, they eventually attempt." The doors slid shut behind him, leaving Cooper alone in the sterile waiting chamber with nothing but his book of myths and a growing sense that he had severely miscalculated. The waiting chamber was designed with the same one-size-fits-none philosophy as the rest of the diplomatic vessel. Cooper paced its hexagonal perimeter, occasionally glancing at the various seating options that accommodated everything from methane-breathing invertebrates to silicon-based crystalline intelligences. None were particularly suitable for humans. After what felt like hours but was probably only 40 minutes, the ship's artificial time cycle made it difficult to judge. The chamber door dilated open. Instead of the full delegation Cooper expected, only Zentrock entered, filaments moving in what Cooper had come to recognize as a pattern of extreme caution. Human Cooper, the Voldaxian said, hovering at what might be considered a respectful distance. The delegation has reached a preliminary consensus. Cooper straightened. And? Your cultural artifact has been classified as a Category 7 conceptual hazard. A what? Cooper blinked. It's just a book of old stories. That classification, Zentrock continued as if Cooper hadn't spoken, normally requires immediate quarantine of the providing species and potential memory adjustment protocols for all exposed personnel. Cooper felt his blood run cold. Memory, adjustment, quarantine? You can't be serious? Over mythology? Zentrock's filaments rippled in what might have been discomfort. The protocols exist for a reason, Human Cooper. Species that conceptualize reality-altering capabilities before developing the technological means to implement them have a 98.7% extinction rate within 3 generations of achieving space travel. So what are you saying? Earth is being quarantined because I brought the wrong book to your cultural show and tell? Not precisely. Zentrock moved closer, lowering the volume on their translator. I have advocated for an alternative approach given certain unusual factors. Cooper crossed his arms. I'm listening. The delegation was particularly disturbed by the correlation between human mythology and actual Category 1 restricted technologies. The manipulation of weather, genetic structures, matter-energy conversion. These are not merely concepts but capabilities that have destroyed civilizations. Like I said, those stories were created when humans were still figuring out basic agriculture. We weren't planning to split atoms or modify genes. And yet, Zentrock countered, you eventually did both those things, did you not? After imagining them first? Cooper opened his mouth to object, then closed it again. The alien had a point. However, Zentrock continued, there is another factor that has caused significant confusion among the delegates, something unprecedented in our encounters with developing species. Which is, human mythology contains numerous accounts of capabilities that do not and cannot exist. Concepts that violate fundamental laws of physics and biology, even by the standards of advanced technologies. Cooper frowned. Like what? Instantaneous transportation without technological means, communication with deceased biological entities, manipulation of time's directional flow, creation of matter from nothing. These concepts appear frequently in your mythology alongside more achievable technologies. Well, yeah, Cooper shrugged. That's the nature of myths. Some are about explaining real phenomena, others are pure fantasy. But this is precisely what the delegation cannot comprehend. Zentrock's filaments twisted in what might have been intellectual frustration. Your species does not distinguish between conceptualizing the possible and the impossible. You imagine both with equal enthusiasm. Cooper laughed. Of course we do. That's what imagination is for, to explore beyond limitations. No other species does this, Zentrock stated flatly. All other encountered intelligences conceptualize only what they believe might be achievable, even if they lack the technology. They may be wrong about what is possible, but they do not intentionally imagine the impossible. This gave Cooper pause. Wait, are you saying no other species in the cooperative has fantasy? No equivalent to dragons or unicorns or magic? Those specific mythological constructs in your book caused particular concern, Zentrock acknowledged. The delegation spent considerable time determining whether dragons represented ancient encounters with now extinct megafauna or were conceptualizations of atmospheric fusion technology. They're just made-up creatures, Cooper explained. Powerful magical beasts that represent primal forces or human fears. Yes, we eventually reached that conclusion, but the concept of intentionally fabricating impossible beings for cultural transmission is unprecedented. Cooper sat down on the nearest approximation of a chair, which adjusted uncomfortably beneath him. So what happens now? Am I being sent home? Is Earth being quarantined? Neither, Zentrock said. The delegation has decided on an experimental approach. We wish to understand this human capacity for fiction more thoroughly before making final determinations. And how do you propose to do that? We would like you to explain more of these myths. Particularly, we wish to understand how humans differentiate between the conceptual exercises you claim are merely imaginative and those that represent actual aspirations. Cooper considered this. You want me to explain the difference between fantasy and science fiction? Between myths and aspirational thinking? Precisely. The delegation believes this distinction may be crucial to assessing whether humans represent a conceptual hazard or possess a unique cognitive adaptation. A cognitive adaptation? Cooper repeated, intrigued. The Macanian delegate has proposed a theory that human fiction creation may serve as a specialized evolutionary function, allowing your species to explore potentially dangerous concepts safely through symbolic representation rather than experimental action. For the first time since entering the chamber, Cooper felt a spark of hope. That's actually not far off. We call it thought experiments or sometimes cautionary tales. Like our stories about artificial intelligence rebelling against humanity, they help us think through the ethical implications before we create advanced AI. Zentrock's filaments rippled in what might have been interest. You create fictional scenarios about technological developments specifically to avoid implementing them incorrectly. Exactly. Cooper nodded enthusiastically. That's a huge part of science fiction. We imagine the worst possible outcomes so we can try to prevent them. Fascinating, Zentrock said, and the translator actually managed to convey genuine interest. This cognitive pattern may explain how your species has avoided self-destruction despite conceptualizing so many hazardous technologies. Cooper smiled. So you're saying our imagination might actually be our salvation, not our doom? It is one possibility the delegation wishes to explore before making final recommendations regarding Earth's status. Well, Cooper said, standing up and tucking his book of myths under his arm, I'm happy to give the delegation a crash course in human storytelling. Where do you want to start? Greek mythology? Norse legends? Modern science fiction? Zentrock's filaments waved in what Cooper had come to recognize as their equivalent of contemplation. The delegation is particularly interested in understanding a concept from your book called hubris, Cooper laughed. Oh, that's perfect. Hubris is exactly what the ancient Greeks warned about, the danger of overreaching, of humans trying to be like gods. Yet your species continued to pursue godlike technologies despite these warnings? Well, yes, Cooper admitted. But the myths also taught us to be cautious, to consider consequences. Prometheus brought fire to humanity, but he suffered for it. The message isn't don't seek knowledge, it's understand the price of knowledge. Most intriguing, Zentrock said. The delegation awaits your more detailed explanation. As they moved toward the door, Cooper had a sudden thought. Wait, if your species doesn't create fiction, what do you do for entertainment? Zentrock's translator paused for a moment as if struggling with the concept. Voldaxians engage in precision mathematical competitions and observe natural phenomena. Entertainment, through fabrication, is not a concept we have developed. No wonder you're all so uptight, Cooper muttered. What was that, human Cooper? Nothing, he said quickly. Just thinking that we have a lot to teach each other. Cooper followed Zentrock back toward the chamber, his mind racing with implications. If these advanced species had never developed fiction, never imagined worlds and possibilities beyond their reality, then humans possessed a cognitive ability the cooperative had never encountered. The question was whether they would see it as a gift or a threat. The chamber had been reconfigured during Cooper's absence. The formal diplomatic arrangement had been replaced by something resembling an educational setting, with the delegates positioned to focus on a central presentation area where Cooper now stood. His book of mythology had been placed on a pedestal, illuminated as if it were a dangerous artifact, which apparently to the aliens, it was. Human Cooper has agreed to elaborate on the nature of human fiction creation, Zentrock announced, to the gathered delegates. This may help us determine whether it represents a cognitive hazard or a specialized adaptation. Cooper cleared his throat. Thank you for this opportunity. I think there's been a significant misunderstanding about human mythology and storytelling. I'd like to start by explaining the difference between various types of fiction and their purposes in human culture. The delegates shifted in their various ways: optical sensors focusing, filaments extending, mandibles stilling. Cooper had their complete attention. Humans create fiction, imaginary stories, for multiple purposes, he began. Some stories help us process our fears. Some help us explore our aspirations. Some are purely for entertainment. And some, yes, help us consider the implications of technologies or abilities we don't yet possess. The Mechanian's translator activated. Query: how do humans differentiate between fiction created as aspiration versus fiction created as warning? That's an excellent question, Cooper said, warming to his topic. Often the same story can function as both. Take the myth of Icarus, which is in this book. Icarus and his father built wings to escape imprisonment, but Icarus flew too close to the sun, melting the wax holding his wings together, and he fell to his death. The delegates exchanged what could only be described as concerned glances. This story, Cooper continued, can be seen as a warning about the dangers of overreaching or ignoring practical limitations. But it's also a story about human ingenuity and our desire to transcend our physical limitations. The fact that humans were imagining flight thousands of years before we achieved it shows how fiction allows us to conceptualize possibilities beyond our current capabilities. This supports the adaptation theory, noted the Gelen delegate, color shifting to a thoughtful purple. Fiction as a conceptual testing ground. Exactly, Cooper agreed. Through stories, we can explore the ramifications of technologies or abilities without actually developing them. We can ask what-if questions safely. The Krith ambassador's mandibles clicked rapidly. But your mythology also contains numerous accounts of beings exceeding limitations and being rewarded rather than punished. Prometheus suffered for bringing fire to humanity, yet he is portrayed as heroic. This suggests humans value advancement over safety. Cooper nodded. That tension exists throughout human mythology and fiction. We simultaneously fear and desire advancement. Our stories reflect that ambivalence. But that's precisely why fiction is valuable. It allows us to process these contradictory impulses. Zentrock's filaments waved in what Cooper had come to recognize as deep consideration. Human Cooper, our analysts have identified a recurring pattern in your mythology: humans becoming gods or godlike beings. This concept appears across multiple cultural traditions in your anthology. That's true, Cooper acknowledged. From ancient myths about heroes ascending to godhood to modern science fiction about humans transcending biological limitations, we've always imagined exceeding our current state. This is precisely what concerns the delegation, the Mechanian stated. Species that conceptualize transcendence typically pursue it once technologically capable, often with catastrophic results. Cooper sighed. I understand your concern, but there's another aspect of human fiction you're missing. For every story about transcendence, we have a dozen cautionary tales about its dangers. For every hero who becomes godlike, there's a villain who seeks power and is destroyed by it. He walked over to the book and carefully turned to a specific page. Take the myth of King Midas. He wished for the ability to turn everything he touched into gold, essentially matter transformation technology. But when he discovered he couldn't eat or drink, and that he had turned his own daughter to gold, he begged to have the power removed. The delegates processed this in silence. The pattern repeats throughout human storytelling, Cooper continued. We imagine powers beyond our grasp, then immediately imagine the ways those powers could destroy us if misused or misunderstood. It's how we conceptually explore technological ethics before we actually face the decisions. A cognitive vaccination? Protocol, the Gelen delegate burbled, translucent form pulsing with what might have been excitement. The human brain exposes itself to conceptual hazards in controlled narrative environments to develop resistance. Cooper blinked. That's actually a pretty good way of putting it. We tell scary stories about technology to prepare ourselves for its real challenges. Yet your species continues technological advancement despite these warnings, observed the Krith ambassador. Your cautionary tales do not actually prevent development. No, Cooper admitted, but they make us more thoughtful about how we develop and use technology. Fiction doesn't give us answers, it helps us ask better questions. Zentrock floated closer to the book display. There is another aspect of human mythology that requires clarification. Many of your myths involve communication with non-existent entities, gods, spirits, deceased ancestors. Is this also conceptual exploration, or do humans actually believe in such communication? Cooper hesitated. This was treading into sensitive cultural and religious territory. That's complicated. Throughout human history, many people have genuinely believed in communication with divine or supernatural entities. Others view these stories as metaphorical or symbolic. The same myth can be literal truth to one person and beautiful fiction to another. Your species maintains multiple simultaneous interpretations of reality. The Mechanian's optical sensors recalibrated rapidly. This suggests a high tolerance for cognitive dissonance. Or cognitive flexibility, Cooper countered. Humans can hold contradictory ideas in tension, considering multiple possibilities without fully committing to any single interpretation. It's not that different from scientific hypothesis testing. The chamber fell silent as the delegates processed this information. Cooper could almost feel them recalibrating their assessment of human cognition. Finally, Zentrock spoke. Human, Cooper, your explanations have provided valuable context. However, a fundamental concern remains. The Cooperative has encountered 17 species that conceptualized reality-altering technologies before developing them. 15 destroyed themselves. The 2 survivors implemented strict cultural taboos against certain applications. And humans have no such taboos. Cooper finished the thought. We imagine everything, restrict nothing conceptually. Precisely, confirmed Zentrock. Your mythology and fiction suggest humans will attempt any technology they can conceive regardless of risk. Cooper shook his head. That's where you're wrong. We do have taboos. They're just embedded in our stories rather than formalized in our laws. Our fiction doesn't just imagine possibilities, it explores consequences. It creates cultural reference points that warn against certain paths. Can you provide an example? Asked the Gellan delegate. Frankenstein, Cooper said immediately. It's not in this anthology, but it's a famous human story about a scientist who creates artificial life, only to be destroyed by his creation. For 200 years, that story has served as a cultural shorthand for technology developed without considering ethical implications. We don't need formal taboos against creating artificial life because we've collectively processed the dangers through fiction. The Mechanian's translator hummed as it processed this concept. You suggest that human fiction serves as distributed ethical processing, exploring technological hazards through narrative rather than regulation? Exactly. Cooper felt a surge of hope that they were finally understanding. We don't prevent ourselves from imagining dangerous technologies. We process their implications through stories, which helps us develop ethical frameworks before the technologies exist. A fascinating adaptation, Zentrock acknowledged, filaments waving in what might have been admiration. However, the historical record suggests this approach has limitations. Your species has developed numerous destructive technologies despite fictional warnings. Cooper's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. We're not perfect. Fiction doesn't prevent all mistakes or misapplications, but it helps us process and learn from them. The Krith ambassador's mandibles clicked rapidly. If this human cognitive pattern is as described, it represents both opportunity and hazard for the Cooperative. Humans may conceptualize solutions other species cannot imagine, but they may also pursue technological applications others would instinctively avoid. That's a fair assessment, Cooper admitted. We're imaginative, curious, and sometimes reckless. But we're also self-aware enough to recognize our tendencies and try to balance them. Zentrock's filaments stilled in what Cooper had come to recognize as their decision-making pose. After a moment, the alien addressed the delegation. I propose, A modified assessment protocol. Human fiction appears to serve as a cognitive adaptation that allows conceptual exploration of technologies before development. This may explain how humans have avoided self-destruction despite their tendency toward unrestricted imagination. The delegates signaled various forms of agreement, or at least willingness to consider the proposal. Human Cooper, Zentrock, continued. The delegation requests access to a broader sample of human fiction, particularly stories that explore the ethical implications of advanced technologies. This will allow us to better assess whether human narrative processing adequately addresses conceptual hazards. Cooper smiled. I think that can be arranged. Earth has produced thousands of stories exploring the implications of everything, from artificial intelligence to genetic engineering to faster-than-light travel. Some warning of dangers, others imagining benefits. And humans heed these fictional warnings? Asked the Mechanian skeptically. Sometimes, Cooper said honestly, and sometimes we make the mistakes anyway, then write new stories about what we learned. Fiction isn't perfect protection against hubris. It's just one of the ways we process our relationship with technology and power. The Gellan delegate burbled thoughtfully. This suggests humans may have developed a unique cognitive mechanism for processing technological ethics through narrative rather than experience. Most species must experience a technology's negative consequences directly before developing appropriate caution. Exactly. Cooper nodded. We try to imagine the worst before it happens so we can try to prevent it. Yet you still pursue technologies your own stories warn against, observed the Krith ambassador.